How does a man born into poverty, raised in a system designed to break him, and trapped in a cycle of crime become one of the most powerful voices for justice in American history? Today, we're diving into the life of Malcolm X, a man who transformed himself and the world around him through his unyielding fight for equality and empowerment. From his turbulent childhood to his monumental impact on the civil rights movement, Malcolm's story is one of resilience, transformation, and profound influence. In this video, we'll explore the world Malcolm was born into, the struggles that shaped him, the journey that led him to greatness, and the enduring legacy he left behind. So, grab a cup of coffee and let's get into it. Be sure to stick around until the end to discover how you can help keep Malcolm's legacy alive. Malcolm X was born in 1925 during the oppressive reign of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation across the southern United States. These laws relegated African Americans to second-class citizenship, dictating where they could live, work, and even sit on public transportation. This was also a time of racial terror, with the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups wielding violence to maintain their grip on power. Lynching was a horrifyingly common occurrence, used to instill fear in black communities and assert white dominance. Against this backdrop, millions of African Americans participated in the Great Migration, leaving the South in search of safety and opportunity in northern cities. Yet even in the North, systemic racism followed them in subtler but equally damaging forms. Housing discrimination confined black families to overcrowded and underfunded neighborhoods through practices like redlining, where banks and realtors denied loans or sales based on race. Employment opportunities were also limited, forcing many into low-paying, unstable jobs while unions often excluded black workers. Adding to these challenges, police brutality was rampant, as law enforcement frequently acted as enforcers of the racial hierarchy. This was the world Malcolm Little was born into. His parents, Earl and Louise Little, were no strangers to these dangers. Earl, a preacher and devoted follower of Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement, was outspoken in his calls for black pride and self-reliance. His activism made the Little family a target for white supremacist violence. Their home was burned down by the Ku Klux Klan, forcing them to flee Omaha, Nebraska, for Lansing, Michigan. But the harassment continued. Earl was killed under suspicious circumstances, his death officially ruled an accident, though many suspected it was a lynching. Louise, left to raise 8 children alone, faced immense pressure and systemic barriers. Eventually, she was institutionalized, and her children were separated into foster care. The struggles of the Little family mirrored the collective experiences of African Americans during this era, an unrelenting fight against a society determined to oppress them. These early traumas and injustices shaped Malcolm's understanding of the world, seeding the resilience, anger, and drive that would later define his activism. After the tragic death of his father, Earl Little, and the institutionalization of his mother, Louise, Malcolm's life descended into a chaotic spiral. Earl's death, officially ruled an accident, was widely believed to be a racially motivated murder orchestrated by white supremacists angered by his outspoken support for Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement. This loss left the Little family emotionally shattered and financially destitute. Louise, now a single mother of 8 children, faced immense pressure and relentless systemic barriers as she struggled to keep the family afloat. Louise's determination to remain independent only deepened the family's isolation. Refusing government assistance, which was often laden with racist assumptions and condescension, she worked tirelessly to provide for her children. However, the weight of poverty and grief took its toll. After years of relentless struggle, Louise's mental health deteriorated, leading to her institutionalization when Malcolm was just 12 years old. This marked the definitive fracturing of the Little family, as Malcolm and his siblings were placed into separate foster homes. The foster care system, while providing basic needs, was a cold and isolating environment for Malcolm. As a young black boy in a predominantly white system, he faced racism and struggled to feel a sense of belonging. Despite these challenges, Malcolm initially excelled in school, where his intelligence and charisma made him stand out. He expressed an early aspiration to become a lawyer, a dream that showcased his ambition and potential. But this hope was cruelly dashed when a white teacher dismissed his ambitions, suggesting instead that Malcolm should aim to be a carpenter. The message was clear: society had no place for black professionals. That moment was a turning point for Malcolm. The teacher's words crushed his sense of possibility, replacing it with bitterness and disillusionment. He began to see education not as a path to success, but as a system designed to keep him in his place. Feeling betrayed by the very institutions meant to uplift him, Malcolm turned away from school and increasingly rebelled against authority. His behavior became more erratic, and he began skipping school and dabbling in petty theft, reflecting his growing alienation. This period of Malcolm's life illustrates how systemic racism and personal tragedy shaped his early years. The loss of his family, the rejection of his aspirations, and the dehumanizing forces around him ignited a sense of anger and distrust that would define his worldview. These early struggles, though devastating, were pivotal in molding the fire and resilience that would later transform him into one of history's most powerful voices for justice and equality. As a teenager, Malcolm moved to Boston to live with his half-sister, Ella Little Collins. Ella was an independent and determined woman who owned her home and was active in the black community. She provided Malcolm with a stable environment and an example of self-reliance, but Malcolm was more captivated by the vibrant culture of Boston's Roxbury neighborhood. Roxbury, with its bustling nightlife, jazz clubs, and stylish young people, offered Malcolm an escape from the hardships he had endured growing up. Here, he encountered a fast-paced urban environment that celebrated black culture, but also exposed him to new challenges and temptations. Malcolm quickly immersed himself in the lively social scene of Roxbury, adopting a new persona to match. He dyed his hair red and began calling himself Detroit Red, a nod to both his reddish hair and his roots in Michigan. This nickname symbolized Malcolm's reinvention of himself as he sought to fit into the dynamic, fast-moving world around him. Detroit Red was charming, street-smart, and resourceful, qualities that allowed Malcolm to navigate Roxbury's underground economy with ease. However, this persona also marked the beginning of his descent into a life of petty crime. Roxbury served as a springboard for Malcolm's move to Harlem, another hub of black culture and creativity during the 1940s. Harlem was a place of immense energy and innovation, home to artists, musicians, and political thinkers shaping the future of Black America. But it was also a city marked by poverty, systemic neglect, and a thriving underground economy. Malcolm thrived in this environment, working as a waiter at jazz clubs and becoming deeply entrenched in street life. His charisma and quick wit made him a natural fit for hustling, and he soon became involved in running numbers, selling drugs, and other illicit activities. In Harlem, Malcolm's criminal enterprises grew more ambitious. He collaborated with others to target affluent homes in a series of burglaries, leveraging his sharp mind and leadership skills to organize these operations. Despite the excitement and financial rewards, this lifestyle carried significant risks. Law enforcement was quick to crack down on black men involved in crime, and Malcolm's growing reputation eventually caught up with him. At the age of 21, he was arrested in Boston for burglary and sentenced to 10 years in prison, a punishment far harsher than those faced by white counterparts committing similar offenses. Malcolm's arrest seemed to cement the societal expectation that he, like many young black men of his time, would become another casualty of systemic oppression. The vibrant neighborhoods he had been drawn to were rich in culture, but also constrained by poverty, discrimination, and limited opportunities. For many, crime offered one of the few paths to economic survival, but it also served as a trap that funneled countless lives into the prison system. Malcolm's story reflected these broader patterns, as his intelligence and resourcefulness were stifled by systemic racism and the lure of the streets. Yet, his time in prison would mark a turning point in Malcolm's life. Stripped of his freedom and removed from the influences of street life, he was introduced to new ideas that would fundamentally transform his worldview. What seemed like the end of his story was, in fact, the beginning of a remarkable journey that would lead him to become one of the most influential voices in the fight for justice and equality. Malcolm X's time in prison marked a profound turning point in his life, transforming him from a disillusioned young man into a disciplined, intellectually curious leader. Sentenced to 10 years for burglary in 1946, Malcolm initially resisted authority and gained the nickname Satan from fellow inmates due to his hostility toward religion and societal norms. However, his life took a dramatic shift when his brother Reginald introduced him to the teachings of the Nation of Islam. This newfound perspective sparked an intense desire for self-improvement and understanding, laying the foundation for Malcolm's future as a leader. In prison, Malcolm immersed himself in books, using the library as his sanctuary and education as his liberation. He devoured texts on history, philosophy, religion, and politics, broadening his understanding of the systemic oppression faced by Black people not only in America but globally. His hunger for knowledge was so intense that he famously copied entire dictionaries by hand to improve his vocabulary and comprehension. Through these studies, Malcolm gained a deeper awareness of the historical forces that shaped his life and the lives of African Americans, fueling both his anger at injustice and his determination to make a difference. The Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, provided Malcolm with a framework to channel his newfound knowledge and anger. The teachings emphasized that Black Americans were descendants of a noble, original people whose identity and dignity had been stripped away by centuries of slavery and white supremacy. The nation's call for Black self-sufficiency, moral discipline, and separation from white society resonated deeply with Malcolm. Rejecting his slave name of Little, he adopted the surname X to symbolize the unknown identity of his African ancestors, marking a powerful step in his personal transformation. Upon his release in 1952, Malcolm X quickly rose to prominence within the Nation of Islam. His extraordinary charisma, sharp intellect, and disciplined work ethic caught the attention of Elijah Muhammad, who appointed him as a minister and spokesperson. Malcolm's fiery speeches captivated audiences with their clarity, passion, and unapologetic critique of white supremacy. Unlike the mainstream civil rights movement's calls for integration and nonviolence, Malcolm's message was one of self-reliance, pride, and the rejection of a system that had historically oppressed Black Americans. Malcolm's leadership significantly expanded the Nation of Islam's reach and influence. Under his guidance, new temples were established across the United States, and membership grew rapidly. His eloquence and fearlessness drew national attention, making him a prominent figure in the media. However, his radical views were polarizing. While many Black Americans were inspired by his calls for empowerment and self-determination, others, including civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., criticized his condemnation of integration and his militant rhetoric. Nonetheless, Malcolm remained steadfast in his belief that systemic oppression required a radical response. This period of Malcolm X's life illustrates the profound impact of his intellectual and spiritual awakening. Prison, often seen as the end of opportunity, became the crucible in which Malcolm was forged into a powerful advocate for justice and equality. His journey from incarceration to national prominence underscores his resilience and his ability to transform personal adversity into a larger fight for the liberation of his people. Malcolm X's bold and uncompromising rhetoric made him one of the most polarizing figures of his time. His fiery speeches condemned white supremacy and called for Black self-reliance, electrifying audiences who felt empowered by his message. For many, he was a hero who spoke truth to power. Yet, others, both Black and white, saw him as a dangerous radical, a man whose vision of racial separatism clashed sharply with the integrationist ideals of the mainstream civil rights movement. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. distanced themselves from Malcolm's approach, while the media often portrayed him as a militant foil to King's nonviolent resistance. Malcolm's growing influence did not go unnoticed by the U.S. government. The FBI, already monitoring the Nation of Islam under its COINTELPRO program, identified Malcolm as a potential threat to national security. His speeches, which inspired Black communities to challenge systemic racism, were scrutinized, his movements tracked, and his relationships documented. This extensive surveillance highlighted the fear Malcolm instilled in those who sought to maintain the racial status quo, even as it underscored his growing importance as a leader. As Malcolm's prominence increased, so did tensions within the Nation of Islam. Elijah Muhammad, the nation's leader, reportedly grew wary of Malcolm's rising influence. Compounding these tensions were Malcolm's own growing disillusionment with the nation, fueled by allegations of corruption and Elijah Muhammad's personal misconduct. The breaking point came in 1963 when Malcolm made a controversial remark about President John F. Kennedy's assassination, describing it as chickens coming home to roost. The comment, widely condemned, led Elijah Muhammad to censure Malcolm publicly, deepening the rift between them. By 1964, Malcolm had officially severed ties with the Nation of Islam. Following his departure, Malcolm embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that would profoundly reshape his worldview. In Mecca, he witnessed Muslims of all races worshiping together in unity, a stark contrast to the racial segregation and animosity he had experienced in the United States. This transformative experience led Malcolm to reevaluate his stance on racial separatism. While he remained critical of systemic racism in America, he began advocating for a more inclusive approach, emphasizing solidarity across racial lines in the fight for justice. Upon his return from Mecca, Malcolm's vision expanded to a global scale. He founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU, aiming to link the struggles of African Americans with liberation movements around the world. Malcolm reframed the fight for civil rights as a broader battle for human rights, seeking to bring international attention to America's racial injustices. He argued that the plight of African Americans was not an isolated issue but part of a global pattern of oppression, and he sought to unite oppressed peoples worldwide against systemic injustice. This evolution in Malcolm's ideology marked a pivotal shift in his legacy. No longer confined to the label of a black nationalist, he emerged as a global advocate for human rights, connecting the fight for racial justice in the United States with struggles for freedom and equality worldwide. However, this broadened vision also heightened the threats against him. As his influence grew, so did the animosity of his enemies, setting the stage for the tragic and untimely end of his life. Yet, even in death, Malcolm's transformation and message continued to inspire movements for justice, both in America and across the globe. In June 1964, Malcolm X founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU, a bold step that marked a new chapter in his life and activism. This organization was inspired by the Pan-African movements Malcolm had encountered during his travels abroad, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. Through the OAAU, Malcolm sought to connect the struggles of African Americans with liberation movements worldwide, framing the fight for civil rights in the United States as part of a larger global battle for human rights. It was a shift in focus that reflected Malcolm's evolving worldview and his desire to create lasting change. The OAAU's mission was rooted in unity and self-determination. Domestically, Malcolm envisioned the organization as a unifying force for African Americans, bringing together people from different ideological and social backgrounds. It aimed to foster economic and political independence within black communities, promote education about African heritage, and develop strategies to challenge systemic racism. Internationally, the OAAU sought to forge alliances with leaders of newly independent nations and raise awareness of America's racial injustices on the global stage. Malcolm hoped to bring the issue of racism in the U.S. before the United Nations, arguing that it constituted a violation of human rights. Malcolm's global vision for the OAAU was heavily influenced by his experiences during his pilgrimage to Mecca and his travels in Africa. In Mecca, he witnessed Muslims of all races worshiping together in unity, which led him to reevaluate his stance on racial separatism. During his travels in Africa, he met with heads of state and leaders of liberation movements, building connections and finding solidarity with those fighting colonial oppression. These experiences reinforced his belief in the power of international cooperation to address systemic injustices and fueled his determination to link the struggles of African Americans with those of oppressed peoples around the world. As Malcolm's vision expanded, so did the threats against him. His split from the Nation of Islam had created significant animosity, with some members viewing him as a traitor. This, combined with his growing influence and ability to mobilize black communities, made him a target for those who sought to silence his message. Malcolm faced constant surveillance from the FBI and other government agencies, which regarded him as a threat to national security. Despite these dangers, he continued his work with courage and unwavering commitment to justice. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was addressing an audience at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem when his life was tragically cut short. As he began his speech, 3 gunmen opened fire, striking him multiple times and killing him in front of his wife, Betty Shabazz, and their children. The assassination shocked the nation, robbing the civil rights movement of one of its most dynamic and visionary leaders. Malcolm's death left a void that was deeply felt by those who had been inspired by his courage and advocacy. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were convicted for Malcolm's murder, but questions about the circumstances of his assassination have persisted for decades. Allegations of law enforcement involvement or negligence, combined with inconsistencies in the investigation, have fueled speculation and debate about the full scope of the conspiracy against Malcolm. These unanswered questions have become part of his complex and enduring legacy. Despite his untimely death, Malcolm X's ideas and activism continue to inspire future generations. His autobiography, co-written with Alex Haley, became a seminal work that chronicled his journey from a troubled youth to a transformative leader. The book remains the cornerstone of literature on race, identity, and justice, offering profound insights into Malcolm's evolving philosophy and the broader struggles of African Americans. His speeches and writings continue to resonate with those who seek to challenge oppression and advocate for systemic change. The Organization of Afro-American Unity did not survive long after Malcolm's assassination, but the principles it championed endured. Malcolm's vision of Black empowerment, self-determination, and global solidarity influenced movements like the Black Panther Party and Pan-Africanist organizations, cementing his role as a foundational figure in the struggle for justice. While his life was tragically cut short, Malcolm X's legacy remains a powerful reminder of the transformative impact of courage, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to truth and equality. Malcolm X's legacy is immense. His speeches and writings continue to inspire movements for racial justice and self-empowerment. His autobiography, co-written with Alex Haley, remains a seminal text, illuminating the struggles and triumphs of Black America. Malcolm's insistence on dignity, pride, and unflinching truth-telling resonates today. In a world still grappling with systemic racism and inequality, his story reminds us of the power of transformation and the enduring fight for justice. Malcolm X once said, "A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything." His life challenges us to stand firm in our convictions and strive for a world where justice and equality prevail. The fight for justice and equality that Malcolm X dedicated his life to continues today through the efforts of organizations like the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation. Founded in 2013, Black Lives Matter is a movement and organization committed to eradicating systemic racism, combating violence against Black communities, and promoting equity and inclusion worldwide. The foundation works to build local power, create sustainable change, and amplify the voices of those fighting against injustice in all its forms. Through campaigns that address police brutality, voter suppression, economic inequality, and more, the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation empowers individuals and communities to take action for lasting change. Their work embodies the spirit of solidarity and resilience that Malcolm X so passionately championed. To learn more about their mission and programs, and to find out how you can contribute to their efforts, check out the video description below. Together, we can honor Malcolm's legacy by standing firm in our commitment to equality and human rights. Check the description for links to resources on Malcolm X, his writings, and the civil rights movement. Thank you for watching and exploring the extraordinary life of Malcolm X with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and join us next time as we uncover the inspiring story of Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court Justice.